Hello, and welcome to another episode of Plastic Podcast, the show that tells the science and the story of our relationship with plastic. I am your host, Clark Marchese, and today we're doing something a little bit different. We are going down south to talk about plastic in Antarctica. As listeners will know, Plastic Podcast is part of the Pine Forest Media Podcast Network, which is a growing collection of podcast series that tackles environmental issues with a science and approach. And we have just come out with another one called South Pole, and it is all about the science of Antarctica. If you've been listening to Plastic Podcast for a while, you will know that we've done a really good job of covering the entire planet with plastic, so much so that it is being found all over the Antarctic ecosystem. So I decided to do an episode for that series about plastic and how it's impacting our southernmost continent. And that's what I'm going to play for you today. It's still a really good episode, and it's still about plastic, and you're going to like it. And if you're curious about other things Antarctica, you can search for South Pole and follow the series wherever you're listening to this now. You can also find more information about the entire Pine Forest Media Network in the episode description, where you will find a link to our website, pineforestpods.com. Okay, without further ado, I'm just going to play the episode for you, and we also have new music for this one, which is always fun. All right, I hope you enjoy. Hello, and welcome to South Pole, the podcast that explores everything Antarctica. I am your host, Clark Marchese, and today we are talking about Antarctic plastic in Antarctica. Okay, plastic. So it's a big topic. Whatever you did today, you probably touched or interacted with at least 20 things made of plastic so far. And it may not come to mind when you're thinking about Antarctica, but humans have really done a good job of covering the entire planet with plastic. So yes, lots of plastic has been found all over Antarctica. Now, plastic is a relatively new invention in ecological history, and the types of plastic that we use all day, every day today have only been around really for less than the last 100 years. When we invented it, there was actually hope that it would be a sustainable alternative to other raw materials, namely ivory, but other animal-based materials as well, like tortoise shells. So certainly, when we invented it, we couldn't have imagined all of the environmental concerns it would bring about. And even when mass production started in the 1940s and 50s, we didn't have a strong grasp at all on how the future of plastic would unfold as far as the environment is concerned. Now we know differently though, and there are massive networks within the scientific community researching how plastic exists on this planet, the problems it's causing, and what we can do about it. And this applies to the field of Antarctic research as well. Lots of scientists are trying to understand how the introductions of plastic to this, what we might imagine as an untouched land, is going to impact the continent, the things that live there, and by now we know how connected we are to Antarctica, so what plastic in Antarctica is going to mean for all of us up here too. Now, one of the researchers trying to get to the bottom of these questions is Dr. Clara Manno, who is the guest for today's episode. Dr. Clara Manno is a polar researcher who focuses on human-driven environmental stressors, one of which she spends a lot of time researching is plastic. She is a member of the Plastic in Polar Environments Action Group at the Scientific Committee of Antarctic Research. She also works with the British Antarctic Survey as a marine ecologist. And together, we spoke about how different types of plastic are making their way down to Antarctica, the ways Antarctic wildlife are interacting with plastic, and examples of how it's affecting their ability to perform their ecosystem functions. We also talked about how plastic is altering the Southern Ocean, and what impact that will have on both species and humanity alike. Now, it's not the most uplifting conversation we will ever have, but I hope that you enjoy it nonetheless, and that at least you perhaps learn something. I definitely know that I did. So with that, let's go ahead and get started. All right, welcome, Dr. Clara Manno. Thank you for taking the time to come on the show today. The first question I have is if you could just introduce yourself and tell us a bit about your research.
Hi, thank you, Clark. Thank you to invite me today. My name is Clara Manno, and I am a biological oceanographer, and I work in the British Antarctic Survey in Cambridge. As you can guess from my accent, despite I work in Cambridge, I'm Italian, but I moved in Cambridge more than 10 years ago. So my research interest is to investigate the impact of human-driven stressor that include, for example, climate change, but also pollution. And I have a specific focus on Antarctic ocean ecosystem.
Okay, amazing. Happy to have you with us. One question I think a lot of Antarctic researchers get asked probably every time they speak to someone is, have you ever been to Antarctica? So I'm going to add to your list of people who have ever asked you that question.
Oh, well, first of all, I've been very, very lucky. In fact, I got the privilege to participate to several Antarctic research expeditions. I think the total number is 11. The first time I was 20 years old. This was during my PhD student project, the project that bring me to Antarctica. So each time was a different kind of project. So I've been involved in many different projects, and the main aim of the project were to investigate the mechanism that regulate the capability of the ocean to uptake CO2 from the atmosphere. So basically, we want to understand how marine ecosystem in general can drive this process, can make this process much more efficient. If we focus on my last research expedition in Antarctica, the main objective was to investigate the impact of microplastic pollution on this process. So how the interaction of microplastic with the biota, so the ecosystem in general, can impact the ability of the ocean to uptake CO2. In one sentence, we want to understand how microplastic can counteract the ability of the ocean to counteract climate change mitigation.
Okay, so that sounds super interesting, and we're definitely going to dig into that project as we go along. But in a general sense, to sort of set the stage for this field, because I know there's a growing body of research looking at plastics in Antarctica, what broad-based questions do scientists have about plastics in Antarctica?
The main problem is that plastic in general is a product of human activity. And that means that if you have the presence of human, you have plastic, a different scale. That's why there is Antarctica plastic pollution at the moment, not just in Antarctica, but in general in the polar region. So the research question that we want to understand is, first of all, to investigate the extent of microplastic and the plastic fragment in general in this region, and also how these pollution interact with the whole marine ecosystem. So we want to understand the behavior and the fate of plastic in that region.
Okay, so then in order to find that out, we have to know where the plastic is. Where do we see plastic pollution through Antarctica, both macroplastics and microplastics?
Plastic have been found everywhere, unfortunately. So that's include land, on the snow, in the fresh water, in the sea ice, and also from the surface of the ocean to the bottom of the sediment. In addition to that, plastic have been found in most of the species that live in Antarctica. That include very tiny organisms, such as zooplankton, but also large organisms, such as seals and penguins.
Okay, so basically everywhere. Then I guess the next obvious question is, where is it coming from? What are sort of the pathways through which plastic is ending up down there?
Yeah. Okay. When we think about the sources, as I say, the source is straightly connected to the human presence in Antarctica, or in general, human activity related to Antarctica. We can split the local source to the long-range source. When we're talking about the local source, of course, these include ship traffic, but also activity on the land produced by research base and campsites. On the long-range transport scale, there are so many different pathways of transport. These include oceanic current, also atmospheric current, but also a vector of transport can be long travel distance animals. So overall, the point is that the Southern Ocean that is all around Antarctica is not a barrier to to plastic pollution in general.
Okay, can you tell me more about the long distance travel animals bringing plastic down? How does that work exactly?
There are a lot of animals that travel a long distance from low latitude to Antarctica to feed themselves. So whale can be a good example, but also big birds do this. So this can be a vector of transport, just because the organisms need to move from low latitude to high latitude looking for food.
Okay, and then at that point, they already have plastic inside them when they arrive?
They can have plastic attached to the body as well. They can have a plastic on the feather, for example, not necessarily inside because they ingest it.
Okay, so then let's start to talk about how plastic is actually interfering with the ecosystems. So we have larger items of plastic that we can see with our eyes. So they could be from fishing nets, they could be pollution from tourists. But then we have these smaller plastics, some of which we can see and others we can't, which are microplastics and nanoplastics. How are these different types of plastics impacting the Antarctic ecosystems?
Yeah, first of all, Antarctic ecosystem is a unique ecosystem. And it's unique because most of the species that live in Antarctica, they were living there for millions and millions of years. That means that they are very well adapted to a stable environmental condition. So it's very cold, but it's stable. And in other words, that means that they're very sensitive to environmental perturbation. This includes also pollution and specific plastic pollution. So all the species are very, very sensitive to plastic pollution compared to, for example, low latitude species. And talking about the microplastic, that what we can see, microplastic interact with the big organism, of course. The main reason is because they mistake big piece of plastic for food. So they can accidentally ingest that. Also, they can get trapped inside. And that's what happened especially with penguins and seal, for example. But then when we have a large fragment of microplastic, they start to fragment. And we have also microplastic. Microplastic are even more dangerous because they still interact with the large organism, of course, and they can accumulate inside large organism. But they are especially dangerous because they interact also with the very tiny organisms. We mentioned first zooplankton. Zooplankton are very small, but they are very abundant as well. Actually, the biomass of zooplankton is higher than the biomass of a human being.
So when we're talking about biomass, that basically means if you took all the humans in the world and you put them on a scale, and then we took all the zooplankton in the world and we put it on a different scale, zooplankton will weigh more than us humans. So all of us humans together weigh around 500 million metric tons, and the zooplankton altogether weigh about 1 billion. So basically twice as much. That's pretty crazy.
So that means that is a significant amount of biomass. They are significant inside the ecosystem, no? They are the base of food chain. That means that if there is an impact of zooplankton, this can be a cascading effect on the whole ecosystem in Antarctica.
We've talked about the terms biomagnification and bioaccumulation on the show before, so quickly, basically this is when organisms accumulate toxins in their bodies through interaction with them in the environment. And when they are eaten by predators, the predators eat all of the toxins that were in the prey and also the prey's prey. So toxins build along the food chain, and that's why it's such a problem that all of these toxins are being absorbed by the small organisms at the base of the food chain.
In terms of nanoplastic, that is another step of fragmentation. Nanoplastic can be even more dangerous because it's so small that it can pass to the membrane cell. So that means that it can trigger toxicity. A toxicity can have as a final effect mortality. So we know that there is a lot of physiological destruction already because we perform a lot of incubation experiments when they expose organisms to microplastic and nanoplastic. This can generate egg malformation, for example, reducing swimming behavior. That means that organisms are not able to escape to predator, and long-term sublethal effect. So that will end up in the decrease of population at a large scale level.
Okay, so egg malformation, reducing swimming behavior, and eventually decrease of population. Yikes. Are we seeing any significant decrease in population yet in the data on account of plastics?
We don't, and that's because the plastic pollution is still a relative new global issue. Now it's a recent topic that the scientists are going to start to investigate. So we don't have a long data set yet. We have long data set in terms of accumulation of microplastic on the beach around some coastal region in Antarctica. So we know that there is an increase of microplastic, for example, inside the organism. But this trend doesn't tell us anything about the impact. No, the impact is something that we need to study more into the deep, and we need also long-term study to understand potential adaptation, flexibility, and potential resilience of some species to this impact.
Okay, so I guess we just need to do the research and wait for the research. But it seems like zooplankton are an area of particular concern. So can you explain to us what is their role in the ecosystem, why they're so important to the ecosystem?
If we want to focus on the keystone species of zooplankton in Antarctica, we're talking about Antarctic krill, for example. So that can be a very good example because at the moment there is a lot of study of microplastic and nanoplastic impact on Antarctic krill. Antarctic krill is fundamental for so many reasons, not just for fishery, is important in the ecosystem because it's a kind of bridge between low level and high level food chain. That means that if something happens to krill population, this is going to be a devastating effect to the high level of the food chain because it's a food source of big predator, such like penguins and seals and whales. Also is part of the food source of a lot of commercial fish. So that's why it's very relevant.
So a keystone species is one that is very important to an ecosystem. So important, in fact, that if they were to cease to exist, the ecosystem would change dramatically, if not completely fall apart. Krill are a keystone species in Antarctica, and we will be doing an episode all about krill in the next couple of weeks, so be sure you are subscribed to the show so you do not miss it in your feed.
It's very relevant also because have a very important role in the carbon cycle. In fact, krill can produce a large amount of fishes. These fishes are rich in carbon. They can sink very quick from the surface to the bottom of the ocean. So in a way, this process promote the ability of the ocean to uptake CO2 and then eventually sequester and store carbon into the deep ocean.
Oh, wow. I did not know that.
So it's part of this process that is very important for the mitigation of climate change. Say that what is the interaction with the microplastic and nanoplastic? Krill is a filter feeding. That means that it can get in a large amount, a large volume of particle. It is increase the chance of interaction with the microplastic or nanoplastic. Another important feature of krill is that krill need to live very close or in relation with ice. A lot of studies have shown now that ice is a sink of microplastic. So microplastic get accumulated in the ice. So again, there is an increase of potential exposure of microplastic to krill.
Wait, do we know why ice is a sink for microplastics?
One of the reasons is just that ice take a lot of time to get generated. And the first layer of ice is generated on the surface. And on the surface of the water, you have a lot of microplastic. So it's a process, a continuous process in the formation of ice and the release of microplastic on the surface. That's one of the main reasons.
Okay. So then are we seeing any ways in which the consumption or the absorption of microplastics from these keystone species is affecting their ability to perform their ecosystem functions?
Krill, in this context, have been studied a lot with the laboratory experiment and also with the in situ investigation. In terms of laboratory experiment, it's clear that krill, as many other zooplankton, that affecting, as I said before, in terms of new recruitment of organisms. So there is an impact of egg production and larval deformation, for example.
Okay, quickly, recruitment refers to the process of new organisms being added to a population, mostly referring to the birth of new little ones, but it can also refer to survival past certain stages of development, reaching sexual maturity where their DNA enters the gene pool, or even the integration of two populations.
And also, they can get impact in the way they move. They can vertical migrate, for example, and in a way, this impact their ability to escape predator. So it's not a direct impact, but a sublethal impact. Another important aspect is also that, as we said, krill is very important because contribute to the carbon export, because produce these large, rich carbon fishes. And when krill ingest microplastic, this microplastic pass through their faces. So we have fishes with microplastic inside. And most of microplastic have a low density respect to fishes. That means that impact the ability of fishes sink very quick in the water column. And eventually this decrease the chance that these fishes reach the bottom of the ocean. And in turn impact the ability of fishes to contribute to the carbon export from the surface to the deep ocean.
Okay, so it sounds like microplastics in the Southern Ocean have an impact on the organisms within the ocean, but they can also interfere with or even alter ocean chemistry through krill feces, if I understand correctly?
The principle is what we call the biological carbon pump. So the CO2 is uptake by phytoplankton, they do photosynthesis, they convert the CO2 in carbon. And then in this process, the zooplankton become an important player because zooplankton feed on phytoplankton. So again, there is a conversion of carbon in the zooplankton biomass. And then zooplankton move up and down because vertical migration, then they produce also fishes. And all these pump carbon to the deep ocean. The way this process can be affected can be through different way. And of course, also the change in the biogeochemistry can impact this process, because again, the change in biogeochemistry of the ocean can impact the ability of the ocean to develop. We need to think about, for example, on the fact that in the Arctic Ocean, pollution is not just the main stress. Antarctic Ocean is already under threat by other climatic stressors, such as, for example, global warming and ocean acidification. Ocean acidification impact organisms in so many different ways. Ocean acidification means that the carbon chemistry of the water change the pH, change the carbon ion that are present in the system. It is affect the energetic budget of the organism.
Wow. So the microplastic impacts the organism, which impacts the ocean chemistry, which in turn impacts the organism again. Biogeochemistry, that also sounds like a fun vocab word. So it's an interdisciplinary field combining aspects of biology, geology, and chemistry together to understand how natural processes like this influence the Earth's chemical environment.
The organisms that are much more affected are the organisms that need carbonate to build their shell. But that's not always the case. We know that also krill and copepod can get impacted by the change in the carbon chemistry. Now, the point is that when you have one issue to deal with, can be complicated, but a little bit complicated. But think about that in Antarctica, all the organisms need to deal with a lot of issues. They need to deal with a lot of stressors. So they have global warming, ocean acidification, and now also plastic. That's why an important aspect is to try to put all these impact together and figure out what is the cumulative or additive effect of all the stressors that human activity generates.
Okay, so I just want to make sure that I understand this correctly. There's two major potential issues when it comes to how plastic is altering the ocean's relationship with carbon. The first is that it affects the ocean's ability to act as a carbon sink and therefore has a negative impact on our climate systems. The second is that it contributes to ocean acidification, which has a host of effects on the ocean ecosystem. And micro and nanoplastics are influencing both of these processes.
Microplastic and nanoplastic pollution is an anthropogenic stressor. Ocean acidification is an anthropogenic stressor in terms of climate change. Both of these stressors can act at the same time. So the fact that they act at the same time generate an extra stress on the organism. And the organism, specifically zooplankton, they are fundamental for the carbon export. And if they get impacted, this will in turn influence the ability of the carbon of the ocean to transport carbon to the deep ocean.
Wow. So then what do we do about this? Do you have any thoughts on how we can mitigate the impacts of plastics on Antarctica?
Of course, that's the question of $1 million. Of course, it's important to gather more and more information, because so far a lot of mechanisms are still poor understood. It's not clear where are the main hotspots of plastic in general in the Antarctica, and also it's not clear how they interact with all the keystone species. Some of the species are not studied yet, for example. So first of all, it will be fundamental to increase global cooperation. This is because we need to build a kind of framework for developing a plastic footprint of Antarctic action. In the Antarctica, there is not just research, there is also fishery, there is tourism. We need to find a way to cooperate together to generate a zero plastic waste culture in all the activities that are related to Antarctica. This is the only way to proceed. That's the first step.
Okay, so you just mentioned that there are some species that are still not studied. I'm wondering, what else do we still not know about plastics in Antarctica? What other major research gaps do we have?
Yeah, one of the major research gaps is that we don't have a huge coverage in terms of geographical region, and also temporal data about the plastic pollution presence. Now, we don't know the extent of plastic pollution in Antarctica. And the main reason is that it's very hard to collect data in Antarctica. It's still a very remote place, and we also want to preserve that. So first of all, we should try to increase the amount of data that we have on Antarctic microplastic abundance or Antarctic macroplastic abundance. Then we also need to understand, as we discussed before, the potential additive impact of plastic with other environmental stressors. The understanding so far is very, very poor. This will help you to identify toxicity threshold, because maybe toxicity thresholds are much more lower than what we think. So even if we don't have a huge amount of microplastic in Antarctica, since Antarctica is already under stress because climate change, the threshold to microplastic pollution can be lower than we expect, or what we can expect in the lower latitude, for example. And as I said, this is a very important step because we need to understand with the long-term analysis, so we need a monitoring process. Monitoring processes are going to give us information about adaptation strategy and the capacity for resilience to the impact of microplastic.
Okay, so any future researchers out there, I hope you were listening to this because it sounds like we have our work cut out for us. Now, we're going to start to round out the end of the episode, and I want to ask if there's anything that we didn't talk about today that you think we must mention in a conversation about plastics in Antarctica?
We touch everything, but I want just to highlight one more time again that in Antarctica is a very special place. So it's critically important that the impact of plastic pollution in the Southern Ocean, and in general in Antarctica, is set in a global context. Plastic in Antarctica is a global issue. It's not a regional issue. And that means that what happened in Antarctica doesn't stay all in Antarctica and vice versa. And probably this is a message that needs to become stronger and stronger and come back to the discussion of collaboration. International collaboration with all the countries that are connected to Antarctica need to become much more strong.
Yes, that does seem to be a recurring theme. The next question is, what's your favorite thing about Antarctica?
So I was always fascinated about Antarctica because I was intrigued about the fact that despite it's so remote, so isolated, still play a fundamental role for the health of our planet and for the global ocean circulation. So for me, this region represents the way nature is balanced and the way nature keeps the planet work, basically.
Yeah, that is very true about Antarctica. Now, we've talked about a couple of things today, things that could be a little bit anxiety inducing. So, this next question is sort of a step towards ending on a note of optimism or positivity. Is there any good news that's come out recently in your field of research that you can share with us?
I agree that positivity is important. It's important to keep a positive message. However, the presence of plastic in Antarctica and the potential impact on the ecosystem is alarming. That means that so far there is not a good news about it. No, we just discover the top of the iceberg in terms of issue, potential impact of plastic in Antarctica. However, since we need to have a positive approach, one of the positive aspects is that there is more and more awareness about the issue of plastic pollution in Antarctica and in general in the polar region. And then this awareness, something that is true at different level, this including scientists, all Antarctic operator, policymaker, and also general public. And I truly believe that the awareness is general help to make better choice and also is a way to move forward effective solution and strategy. So we really need to increase awareness, and that's the way we're moving at the moment. So we say that this is a positive news.
Yeah, I think that's definitely true. I mean, plastic is gaining a lot of attention in recent years. It was even the theme of this year's 2024 Earth Day. And all this movement has brought about negotiations for a global treaty to address plastic pollution and even production. Side note for anyone who is curious about plastic and wants to learn more, Pine Forest Media has another podcast series all about plastic and how it exists on our planet. So it's called Plastic Podcast, and you can find it wherever you stream. But I think that this plastics treaty is giving a lot of researchers a lot of hope, and it was made possible on account of the awareness that you just mentioned. And the last question I have for you today is, where can people find you and follow your work?
As I said, I work to British Antarctic Survey. So if you just go to the British Antarctic Survey webpage and then you write my name down, you will see everything that I'm doing. And also, I want to stress on the fact that this is not just my work, but this is a huge teamwork. And everything that we do in Antarctica is because there is a huge effort of a lot of people that work together, not just scientists, but everybody have a small piece in the puzzle to make this possible.
Okay. Well, I will include links to that in the episode description. And this is the part where I say thank you so much for taking the time to talk to me today. Thank you for teaching me about plastics in Antarctica. And also thank you for your very important research in this space.
Thank you so much again to invite me.
Okay, a major thank you to Dr. Clara Manno. Now, you thought I wasn't going to say it, but I'm gonna say it again. Here I go, I'm saying it now. This is yet another episode where we learn how connected we are to Antarctica and how our actions up here do make their way down there. Now, last week when we were talking about ice shelves, the only thing that we can do to solve that issue is to be good climate stewards in a general sense and implement broad, wide-ranging policies to cut emissions. But with plastics, there is actually something more concrete and specific and timely that we can do. And I'm not talking about ditching your plastic straw. This plastics treaty is actually a really big deal. It is being negotiated at the United Nations right now and will hopefully be signed by the end of this year, 2024. I'll put some information about it in the episode description. But it's a really rare opportunity to be able to address an environmental issue at such a large scale. The good news is that it seems like it will heavily address production of plastic, so we can turn off the tap, as it were. Now, if you were very interested in this episode on plastic, you might check out Plastic Podcast, which is another Pine Forest Media series. We talk about plastic in a bunch of different contexts around the world. Plastic in the ocean, plastic in the soil, plastic in human health, plastic policy, plastic protest, plastic art. We talk about the treaty as well and the things that need to be included in it. And if you're interested in plastic, that really is the place for you to go. You can search for that wherever you stream, and I'll put a link in the episode description as well so you can find it easily. All right, thank you to all of you who have made it this far, and we'll talk soon. You've been listening to South Pole. You can find more information about this week's guest and links to their work in the episode description. Cover art for the show was done by Laurel Wong, and the music you're listening to was done by Neela Ruiz. I am your host, Clark Marchese, and this episode was produced and engineered by me, so if you found it interesting, send it to someone you know. South Pole is part of a larger network of sciencey podcasts called Pine Forest Media. We've got one on plastic, one on drinking water, and a couple of new ones coming out soon. You can find more information about us in the episode description or on our website at pineforestpods.com. We are also on Instagram and TikTok at Pine Forest Media. And if you love the show and want to support science communication like this, a 5-star rating across platforms and a review on Apple Podcasts is one of the best things you can do to help us reach more people and for the entire network to grow. All right, thank you to all of you who have made it this far, and we'll talk soon.